Hi there. Welcome to this online lecture where we're going to look at dealing with accruals. I'm Gareth and I hope you're very well. Well, let's have a look at the situation we're dealing with here. So we've got a company called Megan Limited, and at the end of 1 year, it's on the 31st of December of XD4, they've set up an accrual for electricity expense of £300. Now, remember, an accrual is used if we haven't recognised adequate expense for the period that we're dealing with. An accrual is a way of adding in some extra expense. So perhaps in that XD4 year, now imagine that's a 12-month year from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. Now that's a 12-month period. We should therefore recognise 12 months worth of electricity expense. Now imagine during the year we only received 3 electricity bills. Electricity bills, as with a lot of other utilities, are normally done on a quarterly basis, so each bill covers 3 months. Now if we've received 3 bills, that would actually only cover 9 months of the year. Now if we've only recognised 9 months of expense, we would therefore have to bring in the additional 3 months. It's just an application of the accruals concept. We've got to recognise 12 months of expense in a 12-month period. And we do that with an accrual at the end of XD4. Now the accrual double entry, well, if they're adding in some extra expense, they would have to have debited the electricity expense. So that's increasing the expense, perhaps for the last 3 months of the year that they need to bring in, and credit the accrual, which is actually showing a liability. The accrual is the liability that we do owe, because we have used electricity in the last 3 months of the year. The fact that we perhaps haven't received a bill yet doesn't matter. We still owe for the electricity we've used. Now bear in mind, the accrual itself is a balance sheet item, so therefore if we set up an accrual at the end of 1 year, it will get carried down to the beginning of the following year. So unsurprisingly, on the 1st of January of XD5, the accruals account therefore already has a balance brought down on the credit side. Well, that's at the beginning of XD5. During XD5, we're told that we had some electricity bills. Now, what you might notice is that the first bill for £300 that we received just a couple of weeks into the new year, middle of January of XD5, that actually covers the final 3 months from the end of XD4. As we said, utility bills are often received after the end of the period they relate to. So for the final 3 months of XD4, we didn't get the bill until the January of XD5. Now that's why we had to make the accrual at the end of XD4. That kind of implies that we did indeed only receive 3 bills during XD4. We'd only actually had 9 months worth of bill, which is why we had to set up the accrual at the end of the previous year. We've then got 3 subsequent bills, each for £360. Which you might notice if they cover a 3-month period, that's therefore £120 per month in XD5. And they're covering periods for January to March, April to June, and then July to September of XD5. Now you might then realise we haven't actually received the bill for the final 3 months of XD5 yet. We're actually told that that comes in early XD6. We get another bill for £360, which actually does cover the final 3 months of XD5. Now our job here is to go through the process for making sure that we're going to recognise the correct expense for XD5 here, for the year ended 31st of December of XD5. And a good way to deal with accruals like this is to follow this 3-step process. Start by reversing any opening accrual, then post the cash payments that were made during the year, and then set up any closing accrual at the end of the year. Well, let's do the first of those steps, which is to reverse the opening accrual. So this is our balance brought down at the 1st of January. Now remember, to reverse an accrual, you literally post the reverse of the double entry you would have posted to set it up in the first place. So if at the end of XD4 we debit the expense, credit the accrual, at the beginning of XD5 we're going to debit the accrual and credit the expense. So let's post that double entry first. Now I'll number off the 3 steps in turn. So we're now going to debit the accrual by 300, and we're going to credit the electricity expense by 300. Now remember, when you're putting narrative into your ledger accounts, you'd normally just put the other side of the double entry. So the debit in the accruals account I would show as being to the electricity expense on the other side, and then the credit in the electricity expense on the other side was going to the accruals account. So that's the first step, which is to reverse the opening position. And what you can now see is you've actually on the accruals account got a balancing debit and credit. So we've effectively cancelled out and cleared off that opening accrual, because at some point in the new year we will have paid off that bill, won't we? Well, the second step is to post cash payments during the period. Now we actually had 4 cash payments during the period. We had the bill for 300 that actually related to the previous year, and then 3 bills that actually relate to XD5. But let's post those cash payments. Now the double entry for these cash payments will be credit cash, because we'll have written checks for each of these amounts, so they will have reduced our bank account. Debit the electricity expense. So we'll have a cash payment for 300, another cash payment for 360, another cash payment for another 360, and then a final cash payment for another 360. So you've got the first bill of 300 and then 3 subsequent bills of £360 each. Now if we pause at that point, we can hopefully see quite clearly what the reversal of the opening accrual has done. Because if you remember, the first cash payment of £300 actually has nothing to do with XD5. That was a payment of a bill from XD4, wasn't it? But can you see that by reversing the accrual that we brought forward from the previous year, we cancel out that 300. We're effectively saying, well, that £300 has nothing to do with this year. That was already reflected in the previous year. We'd already have dealt with that when we set up this debit to the electricity expense at the end of XD4. So that £300 for October to December has already been reflected in last period's P&L. So therefore the reversal of the accrual, can you see, cancels it out. Now at that point, it means that we're actually only really recognising 3 bills for XD5. The 3 lots of 360 that relate to January through to September, but obviously we still need to reflect 12 months worth of expense in XD5. We're going to have to set up a closing accrual. If you remember, the third step of our process is to set up any closing positions. Now the closing accrual is going to be for this bill we didn't get until XD6. So again, maybe a few weeks after the end of XD5, we actually got the bill for that final quarter through. Now to set up this closing accrual, or the double entry for setting up accruals, is to debit the expense. So we're going to debit the electricity expense, because again, you can see we now need to recognise 3 months worth of expense for the final quarter of the year, and we'd credit the accrual. So to post the double entry, this is our third step now, well, we're going to post £360 as a debit to the electricity expense. Now the other side of that is going to go to the accruals account. Now if we go back to the accruals account, well, if you remember, we actually cleared that off when we reversed the accrual at the beginning of XD5, but we're now posting the closing accrual. The other side is to the electricity expense. But the closing accrual now needs to be 360. So what you can perhaps see on the accruals account is that the reversal of the accrual got rid of the £300 that we'd brought forward, because that's no longer needed. And we've now posted a credit to show that actually we've got a remaining liability at the end of XD5 for that final bill, that 360, that we're not going to be paying until January. So that's the third of our 3 steps. And to finish off, all we really need to do is balance off the electricity expense. Now in the usual way, when we balance off a T account, look at which side is greater, the debit or the credit. Well, obviously we've only got 300 on the credit side. There's a number of figures on the debit side. And in fact, on the debit side, I count up a total of 1,740. So I'll put the higher of the two sides on both sides of your T account, and we then need to bring in a balancing figure, which I'm going to need on the credit side this time. Now this will be the figure that's going to get cleared to the P&L as the charge for the year, and 1740 less 300, I need a balancing figure of 1440. In fact, we can check the logic of that 1440, because we saw, didn't we, that for the bills that relate to XD5, the 3 we'd actually received, plus then the extra bill that was going to come through in the following year, you can see that those bills, £360 per quarter, or £120 per annum, per month rather, and £120 per month for 12 months, does give me a total of £1,440. So actually that's correct. We've got the right charge in the P&L by firstly reversing out the opening accrual position. So basically cancel out that first bill that was paid because that was to do with the previous year, and then also bringing in a closing accrual to bring in the bill that wasn't paid till the following year. Well, I hope that's made a bit of sense. Tried to decipher the mysteries of accruals there. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll maybe see you at the next one.